Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to continue on today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's comes at us from Ite. Alon Oleartchik, It Could Happen to You. This is a song from a live album in Israel from 1999. It's a jazz album, and this track covers the jazz standard, It Could Happen to You. I love this song because of the drummer and bassist are great, but the saxophonist plays an amazing solo, probably my favorite out of any genre of music. The piano accompanying during a solo is just as amazing, almost hard to believe. It's improvised. So, let's dive into this and see what's going on, see what Alon Oleartchik is bringing to the table today. Let's go. I look ridiculous, but whatever.
שמיים וים בעיר אילת אינם דומים לאלה שבצפת. אני יודע שבצפת אין ים, אבל כשאני בחופש אז לא אכפת לי להישמע מטומטם. יש מוזיאונים מדבר עד למים, ויש דולפינים שקוראים להם חיים. אז אין לי מיליונים, אבל אני חופשי. בחופשה כזאת לא ציפיתי, לא ציפיתי כלל.
Wow, it did not take long to get into the solo section. Ooh, interesting time play. Rising thirds? Playful. Even the bass is getting in on it now. very interesting polyrhythmic idea. Drums feeling in on that too. Oh man, bass and drum just having fun back there, completely ignoring our vocal solo.
שמיים וים, בעיר אילת, אינם דומים לאלה שבצפת. אני יודע שבצפת אין ים, אבל כשאני בחופש, אז לא אכפת לי להישמע מטומטם. יש מוזיאונים מתחת לים, ויש דולפינים שרוקדים עם בני אדם. אין לי מיליונים, אבל אני חופשי, בחושה כזאת לא ציפיתי, לא ציפיתי כלל.
Interesting. Interesting. How do I I don't particularly think this is a great a great introduction to Alon's work. Primarily because he seems to have very little to do with this. According to the description, he's doing the singing. We have somebody different on saxophone, trumpet, piano, bass, and drums. He is just doing singing. Although, when I was trying to figure out how to pronounce his name, I came across a video where he plays guitar and sings. So that seems to be his two main instruments from what little exposure I've had to him. It's interesting that there is no guitar in here then, since guitar is a kind of standard instrument for jazz. It's not always there, but it's a frequent enough that I would call it a standard instrument. And so, at best, he might also be the composer, though I don't have any direct information about that. So then he wrote the A section, which is 16 bars tops. I mean, like I mentioned at the beginning, we weren't in our A section for long before he jumped into the solos. So we have a little bit of his melodic writing in here and a pretty good understanding of how he composes chord progression, which he still stays well within the realms of swing, of jazz. So there's not a lot to really pull from that either. So we didn't get to hear too much of his musicianship, although we got to hear his scatting there at the end, and we didn't get to hear a lot of his composition, his pure composition, the pre-composed stuff. But our selector also mentioned that this is one of their favorite songs, so I'm gonna look at this less as an introduction to Alon and more of just um, analyzing it as a piece of music in a vacuum, completely ignoring the names tied to anything. But I am interested in checking out more of this person, especially since I got his pronunciation from a what was it, a news show. He was being interviewed, and they talked him up to be this pretty big name, and I'm really interested in more of his work. I think I got oversold on him from the interview um, before hearing this. So we're just going to talk about the song in isolation, then, outside the fact that he's a pretty big name and his contributions to the track. So what do we have in here? We have a pretty typical jazz track. We have a pre-composed section, improv section that takes up a bulk of the track, and then we return back to a pre-composed section, which is pretty much our first. Normally this would be an AABA structure. Here we have ABA. We don't spend much time at all with our pre-composed set. We come in, we get introduced to a pretty typical laid-back swing pattern on the drum kit, a walking bass line. We have the vocals, we have the horns doing these little ornamental ideas, a trumpet and a saxophone, and the piano is laying down some ornamental chords on the side. Pretty typical setup for a swing track. Nothing here really sold me as exceptional, but nothing here sold me as underperforming either. If you told me I was going to listen to swing music, this is well, medium tempo swing music. This is pretty much what I would expect. But a lot of the music left way for the melody, which is our lead vocals, perfectly sat in there and captured the attention of the listener with a variety that the rest of the music didn't have, being lick based or riff based if you're a rock musician. It really wasn't until the solo section when my ears began to perk up. And just to bring this section full circle, I suppose, the ending A section is also pretty much what I would expect. It's a continuation of our intro minute, give or take, with a pretty typical resolution to end the song as well. Very jazzy way to wrap that up and have a resolution at the end of the track. So it's our B section that I think really makes it stand out, and as our selector also mentioned, this is what really draws them. It's the solos and the way that all this improvisational stuff happens in positive ways. Now, I'm kind of torn on this. I think it's awesome that this album was released in full, no edits, because it allows us to hear moments like this where there are some phenomenal points in the solo section, but there's also moments that the song was fighting not to fall apart from. And I don't want to make too many inferences into why I think any of this happened. I'm simply going to speak about it in a more objective way. We start out with the sax solo, and it is a lot of repetition. And I'm gonna be completely honest, at this point I thought I was getting punked. Now that the song's ended, I completely believe that our selector legitimately enjoys this track for, the reasons that they pointed out. But the opening 40 seconds of the solo section really had me guessing, wait a second, is this a joke? It'd be like if somebody talked up that Beefheart song we checked out a while back, talked it up as this, musical masterpiece where everything just came together so perfectly. And anyways, back to this though. So the saxophonist decides to just pick this run. It was like 3 or 4 notes and just play it over and over and over and over and over. And then it became 2 notes over and over and over. It wasn't just kind of 1 note playing around with rhythm. It felt exercise based. Not to mention that the piano underneath is trying to be playful with this rhythmically and dynamically. The pianist puts these really heavy accented hits in these syncopated sections against what the saxophone is doing, but the saxophone is already heavily syncopated against the swing of the drums, that it's a bit rocky, to say the least. And the accented tones that the piano's playing are hyper dissonant for some reason. Everybody else is consonant. Every other note on the piano is consonant until we hit these accented hits. And the pianist decides to throw in like half-step intervals. And it's just, the only thing I can think is, why? What is the purpose of this? What is going on here? And again, I thought I was getting punked here. But eventually, the pianist decides to lighten up a little bit to fill in more of its role in the solo section and its role in the rhythm section. And the saxophone moves out of this heavily repetitious idea for something melodic and flowing and storytelling. And I really enjoyed this part of the saxophone solo. It showed an interesting maturity and understanding of on the fly composition and built a story that was both moving in expected and unexpected ways. We had a pretty typical trajectory across some notes. A lot of it was well within the key. A lot of the movement was either, a relatively close movement upwards or downwards. We have general rises and falls to our pitch. It was enjoyable to listen to. We had a nice pacing to it. Of course, aerophone players need to breathe, so there's a natural pacing that comes out of that mimics breathing patterns of humans and speech patterns. And so we get a couple of nice twists and turns within something that feels very palatable and expected. And it's just a really nice, tasteful section that came off the back of something that was hyper aggressive in a very rhythmic way. And I was like, okay, they were just warming up. They were starting to feel the night out. Maybe this was the first track of the night. I don't know. It's a live recording, and you can only warm up so much, in the back. It's something totally different when you get in front of the audience, right? So the way I like to look at this, when I get around to playing live performances, or I should say when I got around to playing live performances, it's been a long time since I've performed in front of people. The warming up you do backstage is one actual warming up, at least for trumpet, which is what I typically played when I perform for people. It's metal, so it gets cold. And when metal gets cold, it has pitch shifts. So you want to warm it up to the temperature that you're going to be while you're playing it, so that when you tune it, it doesn't detune over time. If you tune it while it's cold and then you play it, and after a song it's at your breath temperature, well, now it's going to be a bit sharper. So you got to warm it up so you can tune it. So you have the literal element of warming up. Then you have the loosening up of whatever muscle groups you need to use for your instrument. For guitars, it's going to be a lot of the arm. On the right, on the left, you got your fingers. Trumpet, it's a lot of finger work. Embouchure stuff, you're warming up the muscles all in here. Singers have to warm up their vocal cords, right? But there isn't a mental warm up, at least not that I ever got in my, she's like 15 years of performing. 10? Yeah, I guess it's like 11 years of performing. Closer to 10, I guess. Um, for me, the mental warm up was when you got on stage and began the first song. And I'm gonna admit, I'm usually a bit rocky at the beginning of most performances. I just never had a way to mentally get in the right state of mind until I'm on stage playing. So, it could be that that's what's happening here. I don't know. The brain is a bit foggy, and he's like, all right, we'll play some jazzy sounds. Diddle-doo, diddle-doo, doo-doo, diddle-doo, diddle-doo, and he just plays around with sounds until the brain juices start flowing, and then we get this beautiful melody out of it, right? I don't know if that's, at the beginning I said I wasn't gonna make any guesses about what's going on here, but I just did. I can't help myself sometimes. I think it's nice just to have that subjective element to these videos. Um, but yeah, so then we get this really nice melody, and it wraps up rather cleanly in this idea. We return back to this ostinato, this lick that we repeat a couple of times, and then the piano picks it up. I thought this was gorgeous. As our requester, so who was our requester actually? Let me pull this up real quick. Nope, wrong one. It's Hey, that's what it was. Said at the end, it's almost hard to believe it's improvised. And so here's the deal, right? I don't know how much these guys played together. And this is something I've mentioned on a lot of jazz reactions, is that there's definitely an improvised element to it. But there's also an element of, what is it, when you get in sync with people and you just kind of realize what they're doing. And there's also just reading the room, right? So the saxophone ends on these four ideas. If the pianist is paying attention, which they are, if they're a good pianist, they know that their solo is coming up in 4 bars. And they know that the saxophone is playing this idea over and over and over. It's a baton pass, right? This doesn't even take synergy. It really doesn't. What the bass and drum do later, that takes synergy. This is just reading the room. Hey, this guy's setting me up for a baton pass. Let me pick it up, and I'll keep running with it. And that way we get this really nice transition. Now, this could also have been pre-planned as well. They could have done this at every show on this tour. And this is just the one that got recorded, so it sounds, if you never saw any of the live shows, like a unique experience, right? So this is something that you just need that extra context of what have they done at other concerts kind of vibe. Have they ever done this before? How long have these people been working together? All these things come into it. You can't really know for sure unless you've seen every performance, and that is just a task that most people can't do. So you get the spectacle of this because it's the first time you're hearing it. And you can't really know if it's pre-planned or not. But I'm going to go on a limb and say it wasn't pre-planned and that the pianist and the saxophonist either have done this before and it's just an unspoken thing. Hey, sometimes at the end of this, I'm just going to line you up with a neat idea if you want to pick it up. That doesn't mean it's entirely simple, though. The pianist also has to use their ear to figure out what pitches are being played so they can carry it on, or at least the intervals. They can change the starting note, but the intervals need to be the same so that it sounds like they're continuing the idea. It's not entirely simple it's not entirely simple if it's not pre-planned. But it is something that you can easily pick up on. Oh, he's playing that over. Oh, I'll just continue it then, right? Here's the thing, though. Once the piano starts playing, we get some neat ideas. And then something happens. And I hate making this guess, but it feels like the pianist lost track of time. Beautiful ideas running up, big crescendo, get really large, really loud, a bit of tension to it all. It really feels like this climactic point, and then a bunch of meandering ideas. It really felt like this was the point that it was supposed to be passed off, and maybe the bassist didn't realize it was their turn. Maybe the pianist thought it was 8 bars later and it was their ending, and they go for this big ending, and then they're like, oh, and then the bassist is like, bro, you still got like 7 bars. Let's get going. He's like, oh, geez, and it has that same sort of lack of concentration, lack of preparedness that the saxophone sounded like they had at the beginning of their solo. And we just kind of get this random noise segment for like half of a minute, and then the bassist starts their solo, and there is no ending, finality, bringing down of anything the piano. Just the ideas stop coming out of them. And actually, that's not true. The bass came in and the piano was still doing stuff, and then they just stopped playing when they realized the bass is soloing now. It really feels like they lost track of time. Now, is that what happened? I don't know. This could all have been pre planned, you know? This could just be the type of music they make. Maybe they mix more avant garde ideas with more traditional jazz ideas. I don't know. But coming from an A section that feels rather standard, and I'd say half of the solos, maybe even 60% of the solo section, feels pretty standard for swing solo work. The saxophone opening and the piano ending are outliers in this idea. And so they don't work within the framework that the rest of the music has been presented in. And again, I don't know for sure what happened there, but I'm calling it out as I see it. The saxophone starts out very rough, and the pianist ends very rough. And it's really interesting. But like I said at the beginning, I'm glad that this got made. That they didn't decide to cut this or use another night's performance on this album. They used it all because I think it's really important to hear this part of music, especially live music, especially jazz, where you don't just have live music, you have improvised live music. Not everybody's perfect. People are human. There are mistakes that get made, and the show just keeps going on. You heard, despite all that, people still clapped for the solos. Whether that was because they didn't realize what was going on, maybe they thought they were in store for some avant-garde stuff, maybe they just wanted to, cheer on a rocky performance, which is something I've seen many times and something that I even do occasionally. If I'm in the audience and it was a bit of a rocky start, you can kind of see, the performer kind of feel like, ah, jeez. Stand up and clap if it's appropriate, and tell me it's all right. You'll get it next time, guy. So, like I said, I really appreciate that that's all in there. The bass comes in and gives a rather short solo, especially compared to the other two instruments. I don't know if that's because the piano ran over or what was going on there. The bassist only gets like 14, 15 bars or something, and it's pretty much a walking bass line with a couple ornamental ideas in there. They do play around with pitch a lot more than they would if they were walking, but it's still just a series of quarter notes for a majority of it. And then we get the scatting that's on top of the bass solo for a little bit. There's a layering up of the solos. And this is the second time, right? The piano and the bass also layered up. And this could just be something that Alon likes to do in his compositions, in his group. There's not a strict stopping point. Hey, this is the end of your solo, we're starting the next, like would be traditional. Maybe his style as a composer and what he tells his group is, if you want to take another bar or whatever, go for it, but the other person's coming in too. I don't know. It happened twice, which is very unusual. But we get the scatting solo, which is nicely well done. I wouldn't say there's anything in here that stands out to me. There's some really neat musical ideas, and I love all of the um, onomatopoeias. There's a wide variety of onomatopoeias. A lot of really good vocal soloists have a wide vocabulary for that, and I like that Alon seems to have one as well. And then we wrap the song up in a very traditional manner. So I don't really know what to make of this then. We have a track with some pretty mid iterative concepts in our A. We have some phenomenal solo sections, and then we also have some solo sections that I don't know what's going on in them. And it's quite intriguing from that perspective, because it makes me question the intentionality of it. And I think that any song that makes me say, what were they aiming for, in a positive manner, not in a negative. Sometimes you listen to them, what are they even aiming to do here? No, that's not what's going on here. I don't want to say, I mentioned that a lot of this feels like jitters or not being in the right mental space for the performance and stuff like that, not being warmed up for it. And that's what I would think if this were a traditional swing song in every aspect. But because of these moments and how they're not one-offs, there's a few of them, I have to ask, was this supposed to be a traditional swing song? And that is one of the best questions I think I can ask at the end of a song. Because I absolutely love sitting up here and telling you guys I fully understood this. This is what everything meant. This is how everything works together. Here's the breakdown. Enjoy your day. I like sitting up here and having to have that finality almost to it, as an analyzer, but as a reactor, as a casual listener, to sit here and say, what were they going for? They did a lot of things. I kind of see how some of it works together and some of it doesn't. I thought we were going in this direction. We ended up going that direction. I still enjoyed it in the end, but I don't know what they were aiming for. I want to talk to these people and find out. I love that feeling. It's phenomenal. And so that's where I'm at right now. Oh, yeah, one thing I forgot to talk about before we wrap this up is during the scatting solo, I kind of chuckled a little bit. I said the bass and the drums were off on their own world. Go back to that part and listen to the bass and the drums specifically. And listen to how playful they are. I guess I could extrapolate this a little bit. I don't want to run this video too long, but listen to what they're doing, how they're playing off of each other. The bass starts to set up this specific rhythmic structure that's not just the quarter notes they've been playing. And the drum's like, okay, I'll get in on that. And the drummer starts working with that. And the bassist changes it up a little bit, starts to stick with single notes to create more of a purely rhythmic idea rather than the chordal one that it does with the walking bass line. And the drummer starts playing around with that some more. And they're like making their own little song in the middle of this larger track. And of course, the spotlight's on the vocals anyways. And they're just like in the back. It's like being at school and the teacher's like up on the chalkboard. Everybody's paying attention to to the teacher, but you and your friends are like having like the little paper football thing where like you flick a football and it was like, got this, you got to try to get it between their fingers. Um, and like that's what it feels like. They're just in the back of the band doing their own thing, not paying attention to anything else. And I thought that was really neat. But the rhythm section also just tends to be really in sync with each other. Even during the piano section, um, yeah, the piano solo, we actually heard some really interesting counterplay between the bass and the drums and the piano, and it all happens lightning quick. It isn't like a 4 repetition setup. It's like, hey, I've done this, I've repeated this one time. Have you caught on yet? And they're already on board with the idea, and it's just so cool to hear a group that at least to my ears, sounds like they've been playing together for a while, and they can just jump onto each other's stuff real quick like that. And, well, as Ite said, write stuff that feels very complex and interlinked on the fly. Something that sounds like it shouldn't have been improvised but was. That's what a tight-knit group can do. So, yeah, wonderful track. Not at every moment. I have my hang-ups on it, but the hang-ups only leave me intrigued rather than disappointed. Makes me want to figure out more, especially since I said this is credited to Alon, but we don't really get to hear much of his contributions, musically, performatively, or compositionally. So I do want to dig into more of his stuff and kind of, I don't know, see what he does in the rest of his art and see if I can't utilize that to figure out who he is and what he writes and maybe find a better way to interpret this outside of a vacuum. Because just on its own, it's an interesting mix of more free jazz ideas with more traditional ideas, and they're kind of at odds with each other at times, and it leaves me a bit confused, but like I said, intrigued as well. Those are my thoughts on. Oh, yeah, this wasn't even his original work, this was an arrangement. Um, what was this track called? Oh, It Could Happen to You. That's right. By Alon Oleartchik. What did y'all think of this? Did you enjoy it? Anything that stood out to you? Anything you'd like to add on to what I said? Correct me on? Give me your own perspective on? Let me know. I know I was a bit harsh maybe on some of these sections, and if you have a completely different read of it, I'd love to hear it. Until next time. Oh no, in the description box, you can find a link to Linktree. You can find my compositions in there, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.